Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin. He's also the publisher of TheBreaker.news, his website, TheBreaker.ca. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
The $40 billion BC LNG project, a rare occurrence here in British Columbia, where people on both sides of the house are congratulating each other. Have you ever seen this happen before in British Columbia, where politics is a blood sport?
Well, they like to agree on things that make them all look good and that they all can share in some way, shape, or form. Often that isn't something that they design themselves or attract business-wise. It's usually something like when a major sports team wins a major trophy and they all want to share in it, especially when the major sports team brings over the trophy for photo ops. But this is a very large trophy, $40 billion worth of construction to happen up in Kitimat. It's going to take a number of years that Royal Dutch Shell and its partners from China, Japan, and Korea to build this facility, the pipeline that'll attach to it, that'll feed the gas to the facility for cooling and inserting into ships in order to send them over to Japan, get to Japan in 10 days or less. And then other parts of the Asian mainland. This is a big deal that, of course, the BC Liberals, especially under Christy Clark, were really pushing LNG as the be-all and end-all for British Columbia's energy future. They oversold it. The way they ran on it in the 2013 election, the way they had people like Pamela Martin talk about this $1 trillion windfall that would come someday. The BC Liberals even made that famous LNG Prosperity Fund and put hundreds of millions of dollars in that LNG Prosperity Fund, even though the fund was intended to be for the proceeds or profits from LNG, and not a single penny of that money that they put into the fund that they took from other areas where they could have spent it better on taxpayers. Not a penny of that was actually from LNG, and we're not going to see LNG profits still for a number of years. So the BC Liberals did get criticized heavily by the NDP for way overselling it. The NDP also themselves said a few things along the way that this was a waste of time, essentially. But of course, John Horgan, his history in government is that when he was a ministerial assistant back in the 1990s, he was on energy files. He's someone who has long seen a potential for alternative energy sources in British Columbia. Of course, this will be a big employer in the construction phase. It'll be something that will help justify Site C, because this project will need a lot of energy from Site C, well, from BC Hydro, in order to power those cooling engines, in order to cool the gas, to compress it, to liquefy it, in order to put it onto the ships. Interesting enough, while Site C is being built, this will be built, and you got to wonder, well, where were they going to get all the workers to do this? Royal Dutch Shell must have some ideas to do that. It's going to certainly be a boom for Kitimat, which was a company town way back when with Alcan. Well, here they go again with Royal Dutch Shell, which came to Vancouver and made a big splash earlier this week. It's also worth noting that when the NDP came to power in 2017, around the same time is when Petronas announced it wasn't going to go ahead with its $36 billion Pacific Northwest gas project. That was not the NDP's fault. It wasn't really the Liberals' fault they didn't. It was market conditions and also political turmoil in Malaysia. But at the time, the Liberals try to use that as a lever against the NDP and blame the NDP for that deal, even though the Petronas executives came out and said, no, it wasn't politically motivated. It was a company decision based on market conditions. But market has improved in the last year, and the NDP dusted off a lot of the same incentives that the Liberals were going to give Petronas, which includes a major tax break on provincial sales tax on construction. Is a big incentive for that to happen. You know, the government estimates $23 billion in public revenues over the next 4 decades from this project. Certainly, it will show that there is some potential in British Columbia for some other types of energy. And it's interesting how the NDP is a party which took over from the Liberals and has done some things differently, but a lot of things are the same. This is the party that decided to continue building Site C. This is the party that is going to build some infrastructure that the Liberals were looking at doing for transportation. This is the party that is now all in with LNG, and we can expect more announcements coming in the next weeks, if not months, about LNG projects, including the wood fiber LNG project in Squamish, which is opposed by a lot of people in Squamish. The Squamish Nation has been negotiating with the company that owns wood fiber LNG, that is actually building the plant right now, but they're going to get the go-ahead for that provisionally from the provincial government beyond what they already had, which is the environmental approvals. So LNG is now a go in British Columbia. This will be a chance also for Premier Christie, or ex-Premier Christie Clark to maybe resurrect her image, and for the Liberals to rally around that. But again, you know, she was the Premier who staked her future on LNG, and spent maybe a little bit too much time on LNG and not fixing other problems. And maybe if she had balanced things out and done some problem solving, been more transparent and accountable herself, while at the same time juggling the LNG file, maybe things would have been different in the spring of 2017.
Well, also the optics of her taking real estate agents to China didn't help her a lot either, did it?
Not at all. That was the situation that when LNG looked like it wasn't going to happen in time for the 2017 election, that's when the Liberals changed gears to HOUSING, when they started to pay attention to the most important issue in British Columbia. Way too late in the game to do that, but they tried desperately to put the toothpaste back in the bottle and to bring some more regulation to the real estate industry, to add some taxes on foreign buyers, and to offer incentives for first-time buyers in the form of that wacky loan program. None of those really worked per se, even though we are seeing a change in the real estate market in the Lower Mainland now, a bit of a slowdown because the NDP added to those taxes, and is looking at doing all sorts of other types of regulation. But definitely the Liberals were seen as being a little bit too close to these companies, a little bit too close to their real estate donors, and keeping a lot of things secret. For instance, the wood fiber LNG deal, which was for a long time thought of as the only deal that would go through. The smaller plant in Howe Sound, not far from Squamish. I tried to find out what was this contract that Rich Coleman signed with the company's owner, Secanto Tenoto, a couple of years ago, and they sent me photos of them holding up some sort of contract when Rich Coleman visited him in Singapore, but they refused to actually show me what was on the contract that both of them were smiling in front of the camera and showing to the camera. So what other incentives have there been made to these very large companies for these very large and intense projects? Royal Dutch Shell last year reported about $15 billion plus in net earnings, and there's a reasonable question: do they deserve a tax break? Should they be getting a tax break if they are that profitable of a company? But the BC Liberals before the NDP and the NDP now, decided it with staff from the government that that was the way to go. Offer them an incentive to induce them to build, and there will be other monies realized that'll make up that hole in the budget.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, who's in, who's out for the civic elections in BC?
Well, we're just 2 and a bit weeks before Election Day. October 20th is Election Day, and we're seeing what's developing in various communities. It's getting ugly in Surrey, where there's allegations of vote buying and voter irregularities that Elections BC is looking at. Over there in Victoria, there's a bit of a war of words between some of the contestants. Mike Gagan, who is an independent candidate, has filed complaints to Elections BC and the Victoria Police over what he believes are dirty tricks from the Stephen Hammond campaign. One of the other challengers for Lisa Helps, Stephen Hammond denies that, but there have been some complaints of Facebook and other web-based libel and slander and other cyberbullying over there. In Vancouver, of course, the big question is whether Kennedy Stewart, who is seen as the favorite, the NDP MP from Burnaby, if he can sustain that lead, or if some of the left-wing support might bleed off to Shauna Sylvester, who was an early contestant, former Vision Vancouver board member, who does not have what Kennedy Stewart has, which is the support of the Vancouver District Labour Council. Over on the right side of the spectrum, we're seeing the NPA this week especially up its advertising game. They're the party that's advertising the most of all the campaigns. They're doing a lot on radio. They're doing a lot on the web, on Facebook. Haven't seen TV ads yet, but they do have videos that are being shown in their social media channels. Of course, political parties have less to spend this time because it's harder for them to raise the money this time because corporate and union donations are not allowed. And so you've also got Wai Young, the Coalition Vancouver leader, who's making a lot of noise with some of her red letter tabloid type headline announcements of her transportation initiatives to remove a bike lane here or there. You haven't seen much movement from Fred Harding, though, except for his signs showing up. He has not been at every debate. I understand he's not been allowed to be at every debate for one reason or another, but he hasn't really been making much noise about that. Of course, there's the Hector Bremner camp, which seems to have been hit hard by that, the series of news stories over the billboards and the Facebook page that was paid for by developer Peter Wall. So we're watching that race. Watching the race in Richmond, of course, where it's Hong Guo, the real estate and immigration lawyer who's challenging Malcolm Brody, but that's going to be a difficult road for her to climb because of the citation from the Law Society of BC, as well as a recent lawsuit that relates to a $13 million plus collapsed real estate deal. She has a bit of a cloud over her head, and I'm not sure if she can clear that before Election Day. It may take a while for these allegations, which were not unproven, to be heard and tested, but they're not going to happen before October 20th. Malcolm Brody, of course, is the incumbent, and he would be the longest-serving mayor in Richmond history if he does win on October 20th. So those are some of the main races. Keeping an eye on Vancouver, Richmond, and Surrey, and of course Burnaby, where Derek Corrigan is in for a bit of a fight with former fire chief. A lot of people say that Derek Corrigan his time has run out because of all the dumb evictions that his council rubber stamped in and around the Metrotown area. But of course, the big question, I think, with all these municipal elections is because of the major demographic shift that's happened in recent years in Vancouver, how people have been, especially the baby boomers, moving out, cashing out, going elsewhere. Well, who has replaced them as voters, and will those people be as active as voters, and will those people show up at the polls? It remains to be seen what will happen in this election from that standpoint, especially when you do have this overarching issue of housing, which is getting a lot of people angry, but is it an issue that's going to motivate people to go to the polls? It's an issue that every politician seems to be talking about. They all seem to have a solution, but the solutions are mainly aspirational because this is such a severe problem that's going to need multiple levels of government to solve. A problem which does have immigration overtones because a lot of the money is coming from China. Can't make any bones about that. And there are other issues here about the economy. You can make housing affordable, but if ICBC is not going to be affordable, if BC Hydro is not going to be affordable, if there are other economic factors that are going to increase inflation, you can certainly make a house as cheap as you want, but there's going to be other challenges to people's pocketbooks. So I don't see anyone out there who has proposed a gold standard surefire solution to the housing crisis, but a lot of people are talking about it, and will that be enough to get people out and to decide when they do get ready to go to the polls who to vote for? It seems to be, as much as we're getting closer to October 20th, we still have a long time to go.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineered gold mine in the Atlan District of northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Bob Mackin. Bob, besides municipal elections in October, we also have the mail-in referendum on what kind of voting system British Columbians want. What's your take on it?
Well, proportional representation, it's an interesting one because that's another distraction to the local government elections right now, and you can also say the local government elections are a distraction to the proportional representation referendum. This is the NDP pleasing their friends in the Greens who helped prop them up and keep them in power. The Greens really want this because this is really the only way that the Greens can assure themselves of an increase in seats in future elections. There, of course, are multiple formulas that the voters are being asked to decide on as well. This is all rooted in the real complaint that to become the governing party in BC, you really only need to get 39, 40%, maybe even 38% of the votes of the populace. You don't need that much as the vote is spread around to get that majority of seats to get 100% of power and be in government for 4 years, which means a lot of people's votes do get wasted. People that want their votes to count, that want their voice to be heard in the legislature, and people want less confrontation in the legislature. They want to see more teamwork. That's what happens in a lot of countries over in Europe, even though sometimes after elections it takes longer for them to actually find that consensus and create a workable coalition. But this is also quite fascinating if you look at the way politics works. We do have a coalition system really here in BC. the Labor/Environmental Coalition on the left and the Free Enterprise Business Coalition on the right. But look how far that's gotten us. We essentially just let the pendulum swing one way or another every 4, 8, or 12 years, and we don't have really a viable third party. I mean, the Greens fill that role now, but how long can that last unless proportional representation happens? And it could allow the BC Conservatives, for instance, to have a great opportunity to grow their base. And if the Conservatives grow their base, they'd take away members from the BC Liberals, who are a coalition of Conservatives and Liberals. So that's ultimately why the BC Liberals are pushing back, is because they can see the writing on the wall that proportional representation would create more competition. That the same thing would happen in the left, too. So that's why you do have some NDPers like Bill Tillman who are in the anti-proportional representation campaign. But this would, if it does get passed, end one of the last duopolies in our culture, socio-economically, in the last 30, 40 years, especially in the last 10 years. We've seen a fragmentation that it used to be there'd be a magazine for every taste. Well, there's something for anyone's taste now. Niches upon niches of musical genres, types of food, types of drink, clothing. There's the 500 channel universe. You can go online and find 5,000 channels. There's something to distract everyone of every taste. Yet we have this duopoly system. In the States, you've got the Republicans and Democrats. Here in BC, you really have the Free Enterprise versus Labor. The BC Liberals versus the BC NDP used to be the Social Credit Party against the NDP. So there are some within both camps. The ones that are in the Liberal camp are more vociferous about their concerns about this ending and about fragmentation happening. But that's something that we really got to talk about, because if we have only two parties really trading power in the legislature, that really is better for them and not better for the voice of the public. Of course, there are some concerns about proportional representation, that if it is employed in a certain way, that would give party leaders the ability to choose certain MLAs. There would be MLAs that would be voted on by the people, but there would be also a list that would be created by the leader of the party, who would then be able to decide who he or she wants to sit in the legislature with them. And I think that is a bit problematic, too, for people to get their head around, that it would be partly a loss of control, that people would be paid to sit in the legislature by us, but we wouldn't have the ability to choose every single one of them. And I think that's something that a lot of people are unhappy with. I think that there definitely is an attitude for electoral reform throughout the populace, even those who may not be supporters of proportional representation. A lot of people have mused that, why don't we have a none of the above box on our ballots? Why don't we have a choice to say that the people on the ballots are not palatable to you and me, therefore let's vote against the people on the ballots, and maybe even have a threshold that says you need a minimum number of votes to attain a victory and become a seated MLA. Well, what about a ballot that allows us to say none of the choices are good enough? Or to extend it in another way, have runoff elections. For instance, there's been some proposals by City of Vancouver to have proportional representation on the municipal scene, and what we're seeing unfold with the Vancouver City election this year tells us that might be a good idea, at least to have a runoff election to cut back the number of candidates, because there's 21 for mayor and 71 for city council, and that's just way too many, especially on city council where there are only 10 seats available. The election ballot on October 20th will be what I'm told by the elections office, about the size of a pillow slip. It'll be that big, and it's going to be a small poster that people will have to look closely to find the names for the people they want to vote in the October 20th election. So definitely, what I say is that if we get rid of first past the post, the old horse racing analogy there, even if we get rid of first past the post and put in proportional representation, well, there will still be the problem where the voters will be looking at the wrong end of the horse, because there's so much more that needs to be done to change our democracy to make it more effective and efficient. There's too much power concentrated in the office of the premier. Same thing with the office of the mayor. The party discipline system, which causes MLAs to vote what their party leader wants, not necessarily what their constituents want. And the fact that also the Legislative Assembly itself is not covered by the Freedom of Information Act. So what the people that work at the legislature do and what the people that work in the offices of legislators do when it comes to spending money, we rely on them to make voluntary disclosures, but you and I can't make an FOI request to the legislature to find out more information about who's getting what contracts, for instance. That's very problematic too. We need more transparency in our government to shine a light everywhere in order to make things run more efficiently. And so the system needs a lot more work than it's been given, and if proportional representation is the be-all and end-all, well, not much is going to change in the long run. There needs to be systemic change, not just the faces and names, but the policies and the rules and the regulations that run things.
Do you think proportional would encourage more people to vote? Because right now, as you said, you get less than 40% of the vote and you get to form the government. That means 60% of the people who did vote did not get what they wanted. And I think a lot of people feel, why bother voting if my wishes aren't going to be acknowledged?
It definitely would. The problem is, and we've had two previous proportional representation referendums which both failed, and those referendums were bogged down by complexity, that if you get the very learned political science professors to come into the discourse, they're going to lose a lot of average people, because a lot of average people didn't go to political science classes or university. They're not like people like me who did enjoy political science class and found it very fascinating, and can understand what those professors may be saying. But if it becomes the kind of debate where it's all about professors and not about real practical solutions, that can be very problematic. And that's what really was the reason for the two failed previous referendums on proportional representation. But this would be something that, if passed, give people a chance to have a more powerful vote, because if you're handing the keys to government to a group of people who are not supported by most people, in fact, in some cases, you can make the argument that most of the governments we've elected in recent memory are not supported by the majority of the people. They're supported by, in some cases, a majority or plurality of voters, but if you do the math, you count the number of people that do not vote with the number of people that did vote in the affirmative for a certain candidate or party. You put those numbers together, or you compare them and contrast them, and you'll find that no, the people that are running our governments these days do not have a mandate from the majority of the people, and I think that's quite problematic. There are people that don't vote for a number of reasons, and some people don't realize the value, don't realize that we need to do whatever we can to keep what we have of a democracy going. There are some people that actually do not vote because they don't have that chance to mark a box that says none of the above. And there's some people that look at it and say that the system beyond the electoral system, the actual governing system, is not as transparent or accountable as it should and could be, and that ultimately the government always wins. The government always seems to raise taxes and create more regulations that cause some people more problems and don't solve all the problems that we do need solved in order to have better communities. So there is a group of people in that non-voting bubble that is out there that has sometimes good reasons not to vote, and governments and political parties need to do a better job of being better behaved and making it more palatable for people to vote. So this is an interesting exercise, and this could be third time lucky for the pro-proportional representation forces.
Do you think Andrew Weaver has been his own worst enemy when it comes to proportional representation? Because the Green Party seems to be the anti-job party.
Well, I mean, the Green Party being the anti-job party, they have blocked the NDP from fulfilling a few promises, but they really are the only opposition per se in the legislature that really is effective. I mean, the Liberals have the numbers and they're the official opposition, but they're still trying to find their feet. Andrew Weaver has been able to say a few adverse comments towards John Horgan in the last year. Hasn't really fulfilled the promise to pull the government down quite yet as they get closer to the LNG equation. But you've got to have that plurality of views, and you'll get more of that view if there is proportional representation and more parties represented and more people represented in the legislature from across the spectrum. You will have more indifferent ideas that are looking at the economy in different fashions. Of course, the Greens, might be painted as an anti-job party, but they've also been a party that did bring to the fore, for instance, they were one that was challenging the NDP on the cost overruns for the Port Mann Bridge project last year after they came to power. The Liberals, unfortunately, they were the party that made that project and allowed it to go off budget, off time, and so they weren't the right ones to ask these questions. So it's an interesting dynamic now with this three-way system, and we'll have to see what happens at the end of November when the ballots are counted, which way it goes, and if it goes one way, if it goes against the referendum, then what does that do to the relationship between the Greens and the NDP?
Bob, always fascinating.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin. He's the publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.